Good evening, friends, and welcome to another gentle journey through the curious corridors of history. Tonight, we'll drift into the surprisingly intimate and practical world of medieval knights, exploring one of history's most whispered questions with the warmth of a flickering candle and the comfort of soft blankets. Take a moment now to dim your lights. Perhaps light a candle if you have one nearby, and settle under your favorite blanket. Let the world outside fade away as we explore this wonderfully human aspect of knightly life together. The rain may be pattering against your window, or perhaps there's a gentle breeze rustling through the trees outside. But here in our cozy space, we're about to embark on a journey that's both educational and deeply relaxing. If this calm journey helps you unwind and carries you toward peaceful sleep, feel free to tap, like, and subscribe, but only if it feels right to you. No pressure here, just a gentle invitation, like a friend offering you a warm cup of tea by the fireside. Let me tell you a story that begins not with grand battles or noble quests, but with something far more universal and human. Picture, if you will, a misty morning in the year 1347, somewhere in the rolling countryside of medieval France. The dew clings to the grass like tiny diamonds, and the air carries that crisp, clean scent that only comes with dawn in the countryside. Birds are beginning their gentle morning songs, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls softly, calling the faithful to morning prayers in a pavilion tent that glows amber from the oil lamp within. Sir Edmund de Montfort is experiencing something that every human being, regardless of their station in life, knows intimately well. He needs to use the bathroom, but Sir Edmund faces a challenge that you and I, in our modern world of convenient clothing, can barely imagine. He is currently wearing approximately 60 pounds of chainmail, plate armor, and padded undergarments. The process of getting undressed is not unlike trying to escape from a very expensive, very heavy metal cocoon. Now, you might wonder, as you settle deeper into your comfortable bed, how exactly does one manage such basic human needs when wrapped in what amounts to a wearable fortress? The answer, my dear listener, is both more complex and more ingenious than you might expect. Medieval knights, despite popular imagination, were not superhuman beings who transcended bodily functions. They were men, and occasionally women, who faced the same biological realities we all do, but with the added complication of wearing what was essentially a personal tank. The morning ritual of a knight began long before dawn, much like the gentle preparation you're undertaking now as you ready yourself for sleep, just as you might check that your phone is charging, your water glass is full, and your pillow is perfectly positioned. A knight had his own elaborate preparations, but where your bedtime routine takes perhaps 10 or 15 minutes, a knight's morning preparations could take well over an hour, and much of that time was spent considering and managing the very practical realities of human biology. Let me paint you a picture of Sir Edmund's morning, and as I do, let the rhythm of the words carry you like a gentle stream. The canvas walls of his tent flutter softly in the morning breeze, creating a sound not unlike the rustle of pages in an old book. His squire, young Thomas, moves about quietly, preparing the various components of armor with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this hundreds of times. There's a methodical beauty to it, like watching a master craftsman at work, each movement deliberate and necessary. The first layer you see was crucial to our story. Knights didn't simply strap metal plates directly onto their bare skin. That would have been not only uncomfortable, but potentially dangerous. Instead, they wore several layers, starting with a linen undergarment called a brise. Think of it as medieval underwear, but with a very important modification. These breaks were designed with what we might politely call strategic openings. They were essentially loose, shorts-like garments that could be adjusted without requiring complete removal of the outer layers. Over the brise came the akiton, or gambeson, a padded jacket that served multiple purposes. It provided cushioning against the weight and pressure of the mail and plate armor, helped distribute that weight more evenly across the body, and offered an additional layer of protection. But most importantly for our purposes, it too was designed with practicality in mind. The lower portion could be unlaced or lifted without disturbing the upper portions that would soon be covered by increasingly heavy and complex armor. Pieces, as young Thomas helps Sir Edmund into his chainmail hauberk. The metal rings create a sound like gentle rain on a roof, a soft metallic whisper that speaks of countless hours of craftsmanship. Each ring was individually forged and linked to its neighbors, creating a flexible metal fabric that could move with the body while providing protection. The hauberk typically extended from the shoulders to somewhere between the hips and knees, and here we encounter our first major practical consideration: medieval armorers. You see, were not naive about human needs. They understood that a knight might spend 12, 14, even 16 hours in armor during a campaign or battle. The idea that such a person would or could simply hold it for the entire duration was as impractical then as it would be now. So they developed solutions, and these solutions were built right into the design of the armor itself. The chainmail hauberk, for instance, was typically split at the back and front below the waist, creating what amounted to a metal skirt that could be lifted or moved aside. This wasn't primarily for bathroom purposes. Actually, it was to allow for mounting and riding a horse, but it had the happy secondary effect of making certain biological necessities much more manageable. The mail could be gathered up and held in place while the knight attended to his needs, much like lifting a heavy coat out of the way. But the real genius lay in the undergarments and the systematic way everything was designed to work together. Remember those bries I mentioned? They were designed with drawstrings and openings that could be accessed from the front without requiring the knight to remove any armor at all. It was, in many ways, more practical than some modern clothing. Have you ever tried to quickly use a public restroom while wearing a complicated jumpsuit or overalls? Medieval knights faced similar challenges, but their clothing was actually designed with solutions built in. Now, as the morning progresses and Sir Edmund's armor ritual continues, let's consider the plate armor components. By the 14th century, knights were increasingly supplementing their chainmail with solid metal plates that protected vital areas. The breastplate, backplate, arm guards, and leg protections were all carefully shaped to the human form, but they were also designed as separate, interlocking pieces rather than a single solid shell. The leg armor, or shows, is particularly relevant to our story. These weren't like modern pants that you step into and pull up. Instead, they were more like individual leg protectors that were strapped and tied in place. The upper portions, protecting the thighs, were separate pieces from the lower leg guards. This modular design meant that a knight could partially disassemble the leg protection without affecting the torso armor. Imagine, if you will, the gentle patience required for this process. There's something almost meditative about it, like the careful way you might fold back your blankets to get up for a glass of water at night. Each strap had to be untied, each piece carefully set aside where it wouldn't be damaged or lost. The squire's role was crucial here, not just for the physical assistance, but for maintaining the knight's dignity and privacy during these vulnerable moments in the soft golden light of that medieval morning, with the sounds of the camp awakening around them, horses whinnying softly, men calling quiet greetings to one another, the crackle of cooking fires being built up for breakfast. Sir Edmund and Thomas perform this ancient dance of necessity and practicality. There's no embarrassment here, no shame. This is simply part of life, as natural and necessary as eating or sleeping. The intimacy of the squire-knight relationship extended far beyond combat preparation. A squire was part valet, part bodyguard, part trusted confidant. He knew his knight's habits, his preferences, his physical limitations and needs. In many ways, the relationship was closer than that between husband and wife, built on absolute trust and mutual dependence. When nature called, the squire was there to assist, just as he would be there to help his knight mount his horse or adjust his armor before battle. But what about during combat itself? Surely a knight engaged in battle couldn't simply call a timeout to attend to biological needs. You're absolutely right to wonder about this, and the answer reveals even more about the practical ingenuity of medieval people. Knights developed what we might call emergency protocols, ways of managing urgent needs even while fully armored and potentially in dangerous situations. The design of medieval armor actually accommodated this more gracefully than you might expect. The lower edge of the hauberk, as I mentioned, was split and flexible. A knight could, with practice, manage his needs without removing any armor at all, simply by lifting the mail and adjusting his undergarments through their strategic openings. It required some dexterity and wasn't particularly dignified, but it was entirely possible. Moreover, knights often worked in groups, with trusted companions who could provide both assistance and privacy screening when needed. The famous chivalric code that governed knightly behavior included provisions for mutual aid and protection that extended to these most basic human needs. A knight would position himself to block others' view of his comrade, and the favor would be returned when needed. There's something deeply human and touching about this aspect of medieval military life. These men, whom we often think of as larger-than-life figures, were dealing with the same bodily realities that you and I face every day. The difference was that their solutions had to account for 60 pounds of metal protection and the constant possibility of sudden danger. As our morning scene draws to a close, Sir Edmund is now fully armored and ready for whatever the day might bring. But he and Thomas have already planned for the practical realities ahead. They know approximately how long he'll be in armor. They've considered the availability of privacy and assistance throughout the day, and they've made sure all the fastenings and ties are arranged for quick access if needed. The sun is now fully risen, painting the medieval landscape in warm gold and gentle green. The camp is fully awake, filled with the sounds and smells of an army preparing for movement. Horses stamp and snort. Men call to one another. Metal clinks softly as armor is adjusted and weapons are secured. But underneath all the martial preparation, there's this utterly human undercurrent of practical consideration for the most basic needs of life. And as we leave Sir Edmund to his day of adventure and duty, let your mind drift gently toward your own comfort and rest. Notice how your own body feels against your soft sheets, how your pillow cradles your head, how wonderfully simple and easy your own clothing is to manage. Feel gratitude for the convenience of modern life, but also a warm connection to these long-ago people who faced the same human needs with such practical creativity and mutual care. Now, let your mind wander gently from that medieval camp to the solid stone walls of a 12th century castle, where the afternoon sun streams through narrow arrow slits, casting long rectangles of golden light across worn stone floors. Can you hear the distant sound of water dripping somewhere in the depths of the castle? That steady, rhythmic dropping that seems to mark time itself. That sound, my dear listener, is about to lead us into one of the most ingenious aspects of medieval architecture, something that made the daily lives of armored knights far more manageable than you might imagine. Settle deeper into your comfortable position as I tell you about garderobes, the medieval solution to what we now call bathrooms. The very word sounds elegant, doesn't it? Garderobe. It rolls off the tongue like a French poem. But this elegant name masks what was actually a remarkably practical and sophisticated system that made life bearable for knights who might spend entire days encased in metal. Picture yourself walking through the cool corridors of Warwick Castle in the year 1264. Your footsteps echo softly on stones that have been worn smooth by countless feet over decades. The walls are thick limestone, several feet deep, and they hold the cool of the night air well into the afternoon. Tapestries hang in the great hall, stirring gently in the drafts that seem to whisper through even the most solid medieval buildings. There's a scent in the air of beeswax candles, wood smoke from the great hearths, and something else, something clean and almost fresh, despite being deep within a stone fortress. That freshness comes from one of the most clever aspects of medieval castle design. These weren't simply holes in the wall, as popular imagination sometimes suggests. They were carefully engineered rooms that represented centuries of accumulated wisdom about hygiene, privacy, and practical need. And for knights, they were nothing short of a blessing. Let me take you into a typical garderobe of a well-appointed castle. You approach through a short corridor or antechamber designed to provide privacy and muffle sound. The door, and there was almost always a door, is solid wood, often oak, fitted with simple but effective latches. Privacy was not a luxury in medieval times. It was a recognized necessity, especially for the nobility who made up the knightly class. Inside, the room is larger than you might expect. This isn't a cramped closet, but a space designed for comfort and practicality. The walls are plastered and sometimes even painted with simple decorations. There might be a small window, glazed with expensive glass if the castle lord was particularly wealthy, or simply fitted with wooden shutters. Natural light was precious in these deep stone buildings, and the garderobe was considered important enough to deserve it. The centerpiece of the room is the stone seat, And here we see medieval engineering at its finest. Carved from solid stone, often limestone or sandstone, the seat is shaped to human proportions, but with generous dimensions. This wasn't an accident. It was specifically designed to accommodate the bulk and awkwardness of a man in armor. The opening is larger than modern toilet seats, and the seat itself is deeper from front to back, allowing someone wearing the thick padding and metal protection of a knight to use it comfortably. But the real genius lies beneath that stone seat. Medieval castle builders understood gravity and water flow in ways that would impress modern engineers. The garderobe was typically built into the outer wall of the castle, and the waste dropped down through a carefully engineered shaft that carried it away from the building and into either a moat, a river, or a carefully planned waste pit that could be cleaned regularly. Some castles, particularly those built near rivers, had garderobes that emptied directly into the flowing water. Imagine the sound, that gentle rush of water far below, a constant reminder that waste was being carried safely away from the living spaces. It's almost soothing, isn't it? Like a very distant waterfall, always present but never intrusive. For a knight arriving at such a garderobe after hours in armor, the relief must have been profound on multiple levels. Not only was he addressing a biological need, but he was doing so in a space designed specifically to accommodate his particular challenges. The room was private, comfortable, and engineered to be as hygienic as medieval technology allowed. Now you might wonder about the practical mechanics of a fully armored knight using such facilities. Let me walk you through what this might have looked like, and as I do, let the gentle rhythm of the description carry you deeper into that peaceful state you're seeking. Sir Geoffrey arrives at the garderobe, perhaps in the late afternoon after a morning of training in the castle courtyard. His armor clinks softly as he moves, a sound that's become as familiar to him as your own breathing is to you. His squire, Robert, follows discreetly, carrying a leather satchel with the items they'll need: clean linen cloths, perhaps a small flask of water, maybe even some of the precious soap that the castle's lady keeps in supply for the household nights. The process begins even before they enter the garderobe proper. In the antechamber, Robert helps Sir Geoffrey with the most cumbersome pieces of his leg armor. The greaves, which protect the shins, are unlaced and set carefully aside. The knee cops, those rounded plates that guard the knee joints, are next. Each piece is placed with care. Armor was expensive, often representing months or even years of a craftsman's work, and damage from careless handling was to be avoided at all costs. The thigh protection, or cuisses, present the biggest challenge. These large plates are secured with complex arrangements of straps and buckles, designed to stay firmly in place during combat, but also engineered for removal when necessary. Medieval armorers understood that anything that couldn't be removed or adjusted would quickly become unwearable. So they built in solutions. Robert's fingers work with practiced efficiency, undoing buckles and loosening straps in a sequence that's been refined through repetition. There's something almost meditative about watching a skilled person work with such familiar tools and processes, like watching your grandmother knit, or a master chef prepare ingredients. Every movement has purpose. Nothing is wasted. Everything flows in natural order. With the major leg protection removed, Sir Geoffrey can now manage the rest of the process himself, if he chooses, though Robert remains available to assist. The chainmail hauberk, remember, is split at the sides and can be lifted and gathered. The padded undergarments are designed with drawstrings and openings that can be managed without removal. The whole process, from entering the antechamber to being ready to use the facilities, takes perhaps 10 minutes, not unreasonable for someone wearing what amounts to a wearable fortress. But the medieval innovation didn't stop with the basic engineering of waste removal. Many castle garderobes included additional amenities that speak to a sophisticated understanding of hygiene and comfort. Some had small basins built into the stone walls, supplied with water from the castle's well system through lead pipes, a technology inherited from the Romans and maintained by medieval engineers who understood its value. Others included built-in storage niches for clean cloths, soap, and other necessities. Remember, toilet paper as we know it wouldn't be invented for centuries. So medieval people used cloth, moss, leaves, or other soft materials. For knights and nobles, these materials were often linen cloths that could be washed and reused. Another practical consideration built into the castle's domestic systems. The lighting in these spaces was carefully considered too. Candle sconces were built into the walls at safe distances from anything flammable, positioned to provide adequate light without creating dangerous shadows or fire hazards. Some garderobes even had small fireplaces or braziers for warmth during winter months. Imagine the comfort of such a space on a cold February morning, private, warm, well-lit, and thoughtfully appointed. Privacy extended beyond just the physical space as well. Medieval castle life included elaborate social protocols around the use of garderobes. Knights and nobles had established times when they could expect privacy and uninterrupted access. Servants and lower-ranking individuals used different facilities or used the same spaces at different times. The social hierarchy that governed every other aspect of medieval life extended to these most basic human needs. But it did so in a way that ensured everyone's needs were met with appropriate dignity. Some of the grander castles had multiple guards, each designed for different purposes or different social ranks. The lord's garderobe might be larger and more luxuriously appointed, while knights and guests used slightly simpler but still comfortable facilities. The common soldiers and servants had their own arrangements, often communal latrines built with the same engineering principles but designed for efficiency. Rather than individual comfort, the maintenance of these systems was a significant undertaking. That reveals how seriously medieval people took hygiene and public health. Castle staff included specialists whose job was to keep the waste removal systems functioning properly. They cleaned the shafts, maintained the water flow systems, managed the waste pits, and ensured that the facilities remained sanitary and pleasant to use. When castles might be cut off from outside supplies and services for months, the garderobe systems became even more critical. A castle with well-designed waste management could maintain hygiene and health standards even under extreme stress, while poorly planned fortifications might become uninhabitable due to sanitation problems long before they ran out of food or water. This wasn't just a matter of comfort, it was a matter of survival. Medieval people understood the connection between poor sanitation and disease. even if they didn't understand the mechanisms in the way we do today. A castle that couldn't maintain proper hygiene would lose defenders to illness faster than to enemy arrows. For knights, who were often the backbone of a castle's defense during siege, having access to proper sanitation facilities was crucial to maintaining their effectiveness. A knight weakened by poor hygiene or unable to manage his basic needs while in armor was a knight who couldn't fulfill his military obligations. The garderobe system was, in very real terms, a military necessity disguised as a domestic convenience. As evening approaches in our medieval castle, and the sounds of daily life begin to quiet, let your mind rest in the knowledge that even 700 years ago, people were thinking carefully about comfort, dignity, and practical problem-solving. The knight who spent his day training for war, who slept on a straw mattress and ate by candlelight, still had access to facilities that were thoughtfully designed, carefully maintained, and respectful of human need. There's something deeply reassuring about this continuity of human care and ingenuity, isn't there? As you settle into your own modern comfort, surrounded by conveniences that medieval people could barely imagine, you're part of an unbroken chain of human beings who have looked at problems and worked to solve them with creativity, dignity, and mutual consideration. Let me draw you now into the quiet hours of a summer evening in 1415, just 3 days before the Battle of Agincourt. The air is thick with moisture from the recent rains, and the English camp stretches across the muddy fields of northern France like a constellation of flickering campfires. Somewhere between the royal pavilion and the baggage train, a group of knights sits around a dying fire, their voices low and their conversation turning, as it often did during these contemplative moments, to the practical realities of their profession. These men, weathered by campaigns and wise in the ways of warfare, are discussing something that no epic poem would ever commemorate, no chronicler would ever record, but which occupies a significant portion of their daily mental energy. How to manage the most basic human needs while encased in armor and engaged in the deadly serious business of medieval combat. Listen to the gentle crackle of their fire as it settles into glowing embers, and let me share with you the accumulated wisdom of these professional warriors. Their solutions, developed over decades of experience, reveal an ingenuity and practicality that speaks to the fundamental human ability to adapt and overcome even the most challenging circumstances. Sir William, a grizzled veteran of the Scottish campaigns, leans forward and pokes at the fire with a long stick, sending up small showers of golden sparks that disappear into the dark sky. "The thing young knights never understand," he says in his gravelly voice, "is that armor is not a prison. It's a tool, and like any tool, you must learn to work with it, not against it." He's speaking specifically about what knights called the management of necessities, a euphemistic phrase that covered everything from eating and drinking while armored to dealing with wounds, heat exhaustion, and yes, the calls of nature that couldn't wait for the convenience of full disarmament. The solutions they developed were both ingeniously simple and surprisingly sophisticated. Let me walk you through them, and as I do, notice how each innovation built upon the last, creating a comprehensive system that allowed heavily armored warriors to function effectively. For extended periods, the foundation of their system lay in what we might call strategic layering. Unlike modern clothing, which is designed primarily for appearance and basic comfort, every layer of a knight's clothing and armor was designed with specific practical functions in mind. The innermost layer, those linen bries we discussed earlier, were cut and sewn with remarkable attention to functional detail. These undergarments featured what armoring manuals of the period delicately referred to as necessary apertures, openings placed and sized to allow for biological functions without requiring the removal of outer layers. But the genius wasn't just in having these openings, it was in how they were designed to work in conjunction with every other layer of clothing and armor. The drawstrings and ties that secured these garments were positioned to be reachable through the various splits and gaps in the armor layers above. It was, in effect, an elaborate system of interconnected access points, each designed to work with the others. Imagine trying to design a modern outfit with the same level of functional integration. Every zipper, every button, every seam positioned not just for appearance, but for practical access while wearing a heavy winter coat, backpack, and tool belt all at once. Over the bries came the hygiene, or gambeson, that crucial padded layer that protected the body from the weight and chafing of male armor. Medieval tailors who specialized in making these garments developed techniques that we might recognize today in high-performance athletic wear. The padding was distributed unevenly, thicker in areas that bore more weight, thinner in areas that needed to remain flexible, but most importantly for our purposes, the hygiene was constructed in sections that could be partially unfastened without compromising the garment's protective function. The lower section, from the waist down, could be unlaced and lifted, while the upper section remained securely in place. This meant that a knight could access his undergarments without losing the crucial padding that protected his torso from his male hauberk. The male armor itself presented both challenges and opportunities. A hauberk weighed anywhere from 20 to 30 pounds, and that weight was distributed across the entire garment. Removing it completely was a major undertaking that required assistance and considerable time. But medieval armorers had developed design features that made partial access possible. Most hauberks were constructed with side vents that extended from the hem up to the waist level. These vents served multiple purposes. They made it easier to mount a horse, they allowed for greater freedom of movement, and they created access points for managing clothing underneath. The vents could be secured with laces or buckles when full protection was needed, or left open or partially open when circumstances allowed. Additionally, many hauberks featured what was called a skirt split, a division of the lower portion into front and rear panels that could be lifted separately. This design element was primarily intended to accommodate riding, but it had the secondary benefit of making biological necessities much more manageable. The development of plate armor in the later medieval period actually made some aspects of these challenges easier to manage. Unlike mail, which was essentially a single garment, plate armor was modular. Each piece was separate and could be removed independently of the others. This modularity was partly for practical manufacturing and repair reasons, but it also meant that a knight could remove just the pieces he needed to remove for any given situation. Leg armor, or leg harness as it was technically known, was particularly well designed for practical access. The upper leg protection, called cuisses, were secured with straps and buckles that could be undone relatively quickly. The lower leg pieces, or greaves, were entirely separate and could be removed without affecting anything else. A knight who needed quick access could have his leg armor off in a matter of minutes, attend to his needs, and be re-armored almost as quickly. But the real sophistication of the knightly solution lay not just in the equipment design, but in the human systems that supported it. Knights didn't operate as isolated individuals. They functioned as part of a complex social and military hierarchy that included squires, men-at-arms, servants, and other support personnel. This human network was just as important as the physical innovations in making armored life manageable. The relationship between a knight and his squire was particularly crucial to managing practical necessities. A good squire knew his knight's equipment as well as the knight himself did. He could disassemble and reassemble armor quickly and efficiently. He knew which straps and buckles needed to be undone for specific purposes, and he could do the work without wasting time or creating vulnerability. More importantly, the squire provided what we might call operational security during vulnerable moments. When a knight needed to manage biological necessities, the squire positioned himself to provide both assistance and privacy screening. In a military context where enemies might be nearby and constant vigilance was required, having a trusted person to maintain watch was absolutely essential. This wasn't just a matter of personal privacy, it was a matter of survival. A knight caught in a vulnerable position by enemies could be killed before he could defend himself. The squire's role in managing these risks was one of the many ways that medieval military culture developed sophisticated solutions to practical problems. Knights also developed what modern military personnel would recognize as battle rhythm, scheduled times for managing various necessities that minimized risk and maximized efficiency. In camp, there were established times when knights could expect privacy and assistance for armor maintenance, personal care, and biological needs during active operations. These activities were coordinated to ensure that the unit's combat effectiveness was never compromised. For example, during a siege, knights might establish shifts that allowed some members of the garrison to attend to personal needs, while others maintained watch. During marches, there were regular stops that served multiple purposes, resting the horses, checking equipment, and allowing personnel to manage their various needs in relative safety. The logistics of managing these necessities also extended to the design and operation of military camps. Medieval armies developed standardized camp layouts that included designated areas for personal needs, positioned to provide privacy while maintaining security. These areas were located downstream from water sources, downwind from cooking and sleeping areas, and within reasonable distance of the main camp for safety. Camp followers, the merchants, craftsmen, servants, and family members who accompanied medieval armies included specialists who provided support services for managing armor and personal care. These individuals understood the specific needs of armored warriors and could provide assistance when squires were unavailable or when additional help was needed. Some of the most ingenious solutions developed by experienced knights involved what we might call field expedients, temporary adaptations and modifications that made armor more manageable under specific circumstances. For example, During extended sieges, where knights might need to remain in armor for days at a time, they developed techniques for loosening and adjusting armor without removing it completely. Straps could be lengthened or repositioned to reduce pressure and chafing. Padding could be adjusted or supplemented with additional materials. Ventilation could be improved by partially opening certain armor pieces during safe periods. These modifications required considerable skill and experience to implement safely, but they allowed knights to remain effective for much longer periods than would otherwise have been possible. The development of these practical solutions also drove innovations in armor design itself. Armorers who understood the real-world needs of their customers began incorporating features specifically designed to make extended wear more manageable. Quicker release mechanisms, better weight distribution, improved ventilation, and more accessible fastenings all emerged. From the practical experience of knights who had to live and fight in their products, as the fire in our medieval camp burns down to glowing coals and the knights settle into their bedrolls for the night. Let your mind rest in the knowledge that human ingenuity and cooperation can overcome even the most challenging practical problems. These warriors, facing circumstances that would challenge anyone, developed solutions that were both dignified and effective, maintaining their military effectiveness while honoring their basic human needs. As morning mist rises from the valley below and the first bells of prime echo across the countryside, let me invite you into the most intimate spaces of medieval castle life. Picture yourself walking the narrow stone corridors of Bodiam Castle in the autumn of 1385. Your footsteps muffled by rush matting that crackles softly underfoot. The walls here are thick enough to contain entire rooms within their depth. And it's in these hidden chambers that some of medieval architecture's most thoughtful innovations awaited the daily needs of armored knights. There's something almost magical about these spaces. These garderobes tucked away in the castle walls, like secrets waiting to be discovered. Each one represents not just architectural ingenuity, but a fundamental understanding of human dignity and the importance of privacy, even in the most communal of living situations. As you settle more comfortably into your own private space tonight, let me share with you the remarkable world of medieval bathroom culture, where practicality and courtesy combined to create solutions that served knights for centuries. The word garderobe itself tells us something important about medieval attitudes toward these spaces. Literally meaning guard the robe, it originally referred to a chamber where clothing and valuable textiles were stored. But by the 12th century, the term had evolved to describe what we would call a bathroom. And this linguistic evolution reveals something profound about medieval understanding of privacy and personal care. You see, the medieval mind didn't separate the care of the body from the care of one's possessions and appearance. The garderobe was a space for tending to all aspects of personal maintenance, cleaning oneself, adjusting clothing, managing armor, and yes, attending to biological necessities. It was understood as a holistic space for personal care, not just a bathroom in our modern sense. Let me take you inside a particularly fine example: the garderobe in the Lord's Solar at Warwick Castle. As you approach through a small antechamber, notice how the space gradually becomes more private. First, you pass through the main chamber, where the Lord might receive visitors or conduct business. Then, through a smaller room, perhaps used for dressing or private conversation. Finally, you reach the garderobe itself. Wooden bar. The room beyond is surprisingly spacious and comfortable. The walls are plastered and painted with simple but elegant decorations, perhaps geometric patterns in soft blues and whites, or stylized floral motifs that speak to the medieval love of bringing nature indoors. A small window glazed with expensive glass lets in natural light while maintaining privacy through its placement high in the wall. The stone seat that dominates the space is a work of functional art, carved from a single block of limestone. It's shaped not just for human comfort, but specifically. The proportions are generous, the opening carefully sized, and the edges smoothed to prevent chafing against fabric or armor edges. But look more closely at the engineering beneath that seat, and you'll see medieval ingenuity at its finest. The waist shaft drops straight down through the castle wall. Some garderobes even incorporated a bend or offset in the shaft to prevent updrafts and improve privacy from outside observation. The acoustic engineering is equally impressive. Medieval builders understood that privacy wasn't just visual, it was auditory as well. The thick stone walls, the placement of the garderobe away from main living areas, and even the design of the waist shaft itself all worked together to muffle sound and preserve dignity for a knight arriving at such a space after hours in armor. The experience would have been one of profound relief and comfort. Let me walk you through what this might have looked like, and as I do, let the gentle rhythm of routine carry you deeper toward rest. Sir Robert de Clare approaches his garderobe in the late afternoon. After a morning of sword practice in the castle courtyard, and an afternoon of administrative duties that required him to remain fully armored for appearance's sake, his squire, young William, follows at a discreet distance, carrying the small collection of items they'll need: clean linen cloths, a bar of the precious soap made by the castle's women, a small flask of rosewater for freshening. In the antechamber, the disarmament process begins with practiced efficiency. William's hands move with the confidence of someone who has performed this task hundreds of times, but there's still a careful attention to each buckle and strap. The great helm comes off first. Removing leg armor is almost meditative in its precision. Each piece has its proper sequence, its specific place to rest while not in use. The sabatons, those articulated steel shoes, are unlaced and set aside. The greaves that protect the shins follow. Then, the complex arrangement of knee guards and thigh protectors that make up the complete leg defense, with each piece that comes off. Sir Robert's movements become a little freer, his relief a little more evident. By the time William has removed the major leg pieces, Sir Robert can manage the rest himself: the adjustment of the padded acqueton, the lifting of the mail hauberk, the untying of the strategic drawstrings in his linen. Undergarments, the garderobe itself, becomes a sanctuary of privacy and comfort. The thick walls block out the sounds of castle life, the distant clatter of kitchen work, the voices of men-at-arms in the courtyard, the lowing of cattle in the bailey. Here, for these few minutes, Sir Robert can simply be human, attending to his body's needs without the weight of armor or the burden of his social position. The amenities available in a well-appointed garderobe speak to medieval understanding of hygiene and comfort. A small niche in the wall holds clean cloths and soap. Another alcove contains a basin that can be filled with water from a pitcher, water that was carried up from the castle well by servants who understood that cleanliness was both a practical necessity and a mark of social status. Some garderobes even included what we might recognize as luxury features. A small brazier could provide warmth during winter months, making the space comfortable even when the rest of the castle was bitterly cold. Shelves built into the wall thickness could hold not just immediate necessities, but also changes of underclothing, additional padding for armor, or even books for those who enjoyed reading during these private moments. The social protocols surrounding garderobe use reveal the sophisticated understanding of privacy and courtesy that governed medieval castle life. Knights and nobles had established times when they could expect uninterrupted access to the facilities. Servants knew to avoid certain areas during these periods, and even family members respected the privacy of the garderobe. This wasn't just about biological functions. It was about creating space for contemplation and personal care in lives that were otherwise intensely communal. A medieval castle housed dozens or even hundreds of people, all living in close quarters with little opportunity for solitude. The garderobe represented one of the few spaces where an individual could be truly alone with their thoughts. Many knights used this time not just for physical necessity, but for mental preparation as well, away from the demands of command, the expectations of their social position, and the constant presence of others. They could think through the day's challenges, plan for upcoming responsibilities, or simply enjoy a few moments of quiet reflection. The maintenance of these spaces was a significant undertaking that reveals how seriously medieval people took hygiene and comfort. Castle staff included individuals whose specific responsibility was keeping the garden lobes clean, functional, and pleasant to use. The waste shafts were cleaned regularly. The chambers were swept and fresh rushes laid on the floors, and the various amenities were kept stocked and in good repair. During winter months, when the castle's inhabitants were confined indoors for weeks at a time, the garderobes became even more important to maintaining morale and health. The warmth from small fires, the privacy from the crowd, and the simple dignity of clean, well-maintained facilities helped make the long, dark months bearable. Some castles developed innovations that pushed the boundaries of medieval technology. Water systems that supplied running water directly to garderobe basins, heated seats warmed by flues from the castle's main fires, and even primitive ventilation systems that drew fresh air through the chambers while carrying stale air away. The evolution of design over the medieval period reflects the growing sophistication of castle builders and their increasing attention to the comfort of the inhabitants. Early garderobes were simple affairs, essentially just chambers with waste shafts, but by the 14th and 15th centuries, they had become sophisticated spaces that rivaled modern bathrooms in their attention to user comfort and hygiene. For knights, who spent a significant portion of their lives in armor and were often away from home on campaign, a well-designed garderobe represented a small but important luxury. It was a reminder that they were valued, not just as warriors, but as human beings deserving of comfort and dignity. The privacy these spaces provided was particularly important for knights dealing with the physical challenges of their profession. Armor chafing wounds from training or combat, and the simple fatigue of carrying heavy equipment all required private attention and care. The garderobe provided a space where such vulnerabilities could be attended to without compromising the knight's public image of strength and capability. As evening settles over our medieval castle, and Sir Robert emerges from his garderobe refreshed and ready for the evening meal, let your own mind settle into the peaceful knowledge that human beings have always sought and found ways to maintain dignity and comfort, even in the most challenging circumstances. The knight who faced danger in battle and bore the weight of armor all day still had access to spaces designed with care, maintained with attention, and used with the courtesy that marked medieval civilization at its best. The autumn wind whispers through the bare branches as we venture now beyond castle walls and into the muddy realities of campaign life, where knights face their greatest challenges in managing the most basic human needs. Picture, if you will, the English army camped in the fields outside Harfleur in October of 1415, after the grueling siege that had decimated their ranks and left the survivors weakened by disease and exhaustion. Here, far from the comfortable garden lobes and privacy of castle life, knights learned to adapt their solutions for managing necessity to the harsh realities of military campaigns. Let the gentle rhythm of rain on canvas carry you into this scene, where Sir Thomas Erpingham moves through the camp in the pre-dawn darkness, checking on his men and ensuring that the thousand small details that keep an army functioning are properly attended to. The challenges of campaign life transformed the elegant solutions we've explored into something more immediate, more urgent, and in many ways more ingenious. Campaign life stripped away all the niceties of castle living and reduced everything to its most essential elements. Knights who were accustomed to private gardelobes, helpful squires, and unlimited time for the careful removal and replacement of armor now found themselves in situations where speed, stealth, and constant readiness were matters of life and death. The solutions they developed reveal the remarkable adaptability of medieval military culture and the deep understanding these professional warriors had of the practical requirements of their trade. As you settle deeper into your comfortable bed tonight, let me share with you the ingenious ways they maintained both effectiveness and dignity under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. The foundation of campaign bathroom management lay in what military historians call tactical adaptation, the modification of existing procedures and equipment to meet the specific demands of field conditions. Knights couldn't abandon their armor or ignore their biological needs, so they developed hybrid solutions that balanced protection, practicality, and speed. The most fundamental adaptation involved what we might call minimal viable disarmament, the practice of removing only the absolute minimum amount of armor necessary to manage immediate needs. This required an intimate knowledge of how each piece of armor functioned. Pieces could be quickly removed without significantly compromising protection. Knight on campaign learned to assess his tactical situation constantly. Was he in a secure area where he could afford to remove more armor and take more time? Was he in a position where enemies might appear suddenly, requiring him to maintain maximum readiness? The answers to these questions determined exactly how he would approach any necessary disarmament in relatively secure areas, perhaps a camp that had been fortified and held for several days, or a position well behind the main battle lines. Knights could follow procedures similar to those used in castles. Squires could assist with the careful removal of leg armor, the proper adjustment of undergarments, and the methodical replacement of protection afterward. But on active campaigns, particularly during advances through enemy territory or during actual combat operations, knights developed much more rapid procedures that prioritized speed and maintained maximum protection. These battlefield adaptations were passed down from experienced knights to younger ones as part of the informal but crucial education that turned squires into effective warriors. One of the most important innovations was the development of what experienced knights called partial access procedures. Rather than removing armor pieces entirely, they learned to loosen, shift, or temporarily reposition pieces to create just enough access for immediate needs. This might involve loosening the side laces of a hauberk without removing it, or unfastening only the lower buckles of leg armor while leaving the upper portions securely in place. The timing of these procedures became crucial on campaign. Knights learned to coordinate their personal needs with the natural rhythms of military operations. Dawn Stand 2, when everyone was alert and ready for possible attack, was followed by a period of relative relaxation when personal needs could be attended to. The midday halt during marches provided another opportunity, as did the evening when camp was established and security was posted. But perhaps the most challenging situation knights faced was managing these needs during actual combat operations. Medieval battles could last for hours, and the physical stress of combat, combined with the body's natural responses to danger and exertion, created biological pressures that couldn't simply be ignored until convenient. Knights developed what modern military personnel would recognize as battlefield hygiene protocols, procedures for managing immediate biological needs without leaving their position or compromising their unit's effectiveness. These procedures were rarely discussed in polite company and never recorded in official chronicles, but they were passed down through generations of warriors as essential survival knowledge. The design of campaign-specific undergarments played a crucial role in these solutions. Knights who expected to spend extended periods in armor without opportunity for proper disarmament wore specially modified braids that provided even greater access than those used in castle settings. These garments were designed to be managed entirely through the existing openings in armor, without requiring the removal of any metal protection. The choice of materials for these undergarments was also important. Campaign braids were often made from darker linen that wouldn't show stains as readily, and they were cut more generously to accommodate the swelling and chafing that resulted from extended wear of armor. Some knights even carried spare undergarments on campaign, changing them when circumstances allowed to maintain hygiene and comfort. The role of the squire became even more critical during campaign operations. A good campaign squire developed an almost supernatural ability to anticipate his knight's needs and to provide assistance quickly and discreetly. He learned to position himself to provide privacy screening during vulnerable moments, to have necessary materials ready without being asked, and to maintain watch for threats, while his knight attended to personal needs. The relationship between knight and squire during these intimate moments of campaign life created bonds of trust and loyalty that often lasted lifetimes. A squire who could be relied upon during such vulnerable situations was invaluable, and knights often went to great lengths to retain the services of particularly skilled and trustworthy squires. Campaign latrines presented their own unique challenges and solutions. Unlike the sophisticated garderobes of castles, campaign facilities had to be temporary, quickly constructed, and easily abandoned when the army moved. But they still had to serve the same basic functions, providing privacy, maintaining hygiene, and preserving the dignity of the users. Military engineers developed standardized designs for campaign latrines that could be constructed quickly by common soldiers using materials available in the field. These facilities incorporated many of the same principles as castle garden: proper drainage, privacy screening, and separation from water sources and cooking areas, but adapted for temporary construction and rapid deployment. The positioning of campaign latrines required careful consideration of both practical and tactical factors. They needed to be close enough to the main camp for convenient access, but far enough away to prevent contamination of water and food supplies. They had to be positioned where users would have some protection from enemy observation or attack, but not so concealed that they became vulnerable to infiltration by enemy scouts. Knights on campaign also developed personal strategies for managing their needs that took advantage of the natural features of the landscape. A copse of trees, a stone wall, or a fold in the ground could provide temporary privacy for a knight who needed to make quick adjustments to his armor or undergarments. Learning to read terrain for these opportunities became part of the practical education of every knight. Logistics of campaign life included, surprisingly, sophisticated supply systems for personal hygiene materials. Armies carried supplies of linen, cloths, soap, and other necessities, and these supplies were distributed according to rank and need. Knights, as valuable military assets, received priority access to hygiene supplies, understanding that their effectiveness depended partly on their physical comfort and health. Some knights developed personal systems for maintaining hygiene on campaign that bordered on the obsessive. They carried their own supplies of soap and clean linen, maintained strict schedules for personal care, and even carried portable basins and other equipment that allowed them to maintain standards of cleanliness that exceeded what the army's logistics could provide. The psychological aspects of managing these needs on campaign were as important as the physical ones. Knights who could maintain their personal standards of hygiene and dignity, even under the harsh conditions of military campaigns, often performed better in combat and showed greater resilience under stress. The simple act of maintaining normal bodily care routines provided psychological stability in situations that were otherwise chaotic and unpredictable. Weather added another layer of complexity to campaign bathroom management. Rain could make outdoor facilities unusable and create sanitation problems that threatened the health of the entire army. Snow and cold made the removal of armor dangerous and painful, requiring knights to develop modified procedures that minimized exposure while still meeting their needs. Hot weather presented different challenges. As armor became stifling and dehydration increased the urgency of biological needs, while simultaneously making the removal of armor more difficult and dangerous. Knights learned to adjust their hydration and eating patterns to manage these competing demands. Drinking enough to maintain their health, while avoiding situations where urgent needs might compromise their tactical position. The evolution of armor design was influenced by these campaign realities. Armorers who understood the practical demands of extended field service began incorporating features specifically designed to make Spain life more manageable. Quicker release mechanisms, better ventilation, and more accessible fastenings all emerged from the practical experience of knights who had to live in their armor for weeks at a time as dawn breaks over our medieval battlefield and the army prepares for another day of marching or fighting. Let your mind rest in the knowledge that human ingenuity and determination can overcome even the most challenging circumstances. These knights, facing conditions that would challenge anyone, developed solutions that allowed them to maintain both their effectiveness as warriors and their dignity as human beings, proving that practical wisdom and mutual support can triumph over even the most difficult situations. As the first light of dawn filters through your window and you prepare to drift into peaceful sleep, let me carry you forward through the centuries to witness the remarkable evolution of armor design, where the practical lessons learned by generations of knights gradually transformed medieval metalworking from a craft focused purely on protection into an art that balanced safety, mobility, and human comfort in ways that would impress modern engineers. Picture yourself in the workshop of Filippo Negrali in Milan, circa 1540, where the soft glow of the forge illuminates walls lined with the most sophisticated armor the world has ever seen. The sound of careful hammering rings like a gentle bell through the morning air, and the scent of coal smoke mingles with the oil used to prevent rust on finished pieces. Here, in the twilight of the knightly age, armorers had finally solved the ancient puzzle of creating protection that truly worked with the human body rather than against it. The journey from the crude mail shirts of the 12th century to these masterpieces of Renaissance metal tells a story of continuous innovation driven by the daily complaints and practical needs of the men who had to live and fight in armor. Every uncomfortable night spent in mail, every embarrassing moment when nature called at an inconvenient time, every frustrated attempt to manage basic human needs while encased in metal, all of these experiences fed back into the design process, creating armor that grew ever more sophisticated in its understanding of human requirements. Let me trace this evolution for you. And, as I do, let the gentle progression of centuries carry you toward restful sleep. The story begins with those early knights we've met, struggling with the basic challenges of mail armor that hung like a heavy metal dress from their shoulders, creating pressure points and limiting access to the layers beneath. By the late 13th century, armorers began to understand that the human body was not simply a mannequin to be covered with metal, but a complex system of joints, muscles, and biological needs that required accommodation rather than mere protection. The first transitional armors, combinations of mail with small plates protecting vital areas, began to address some of these concerns. These early plates, called pollen for the knees, and rear brace for the upper arms, were revelatory not just for their protective value, but for their modularity. For the first time, a knight could remove protection from one part of his body without affecting the armor covering other areas. This modularity principle would become the foundation for all subsequent armor development. But the real breakthrough came with the understanding that armor needed to be fitted to the individual wearer, not just sized for him. Master armorers began to realize that every human body was different, and that truly effective armor needed to accommodate not just the general shape of a torso or limb, but the specific proportions and movement patterns of the person who would wear it. This led to the development of what we might call bespoke armor protection that was custom-fitted to individual knights with the same attention to detail that a master tailor might give to a wedding dress. Every curve, every joint, every point where the body moved or required access was carefully considered and accommodated in the final design. The emergence of full plate armor in the 14th century represented the culmination of centuries of learning about the practical requirements of armored combat. Unlike the heavy, restrictive suits that popular imagination often envisions, well-made plate armor was surprisingly mobile and comfortable. A knight in properly fitted plate armor could run, jump, climb, and even perform acrobatic maneuvers with remarkable ease. But more importantly for our story, plate armor finally solved many of the practical problems that had plagued knights for centuries. The modular construction meant that any piece could be removed independently of the others. The careful shaping and fitting meant that undergarments could be accessed without removing armor at all. The distribution of weight across the entire body, rather than hanging from the shoulders, made extended wearing much more comfortable. The development of articulated joints in plate armor represents one of the highest achievements of medieval engineering. These complex arrangements of overlapping plates, connected with rivets and leather hinges, allowed natural movement while maintaining complete protection. But they also created natural access points where the armor could be partially opened without compromising its protective function. Armorers developed increasingly sophisticated fastening systems that balanced security with accessibility. The early crude straps and buckles gave way to quick-release mechanisms that could be operated single-handedly, often while wearing thick gloves. These innovations were driven partly by combat requirements. A wounded knight might need to remove his own armor quickly, but they also served the daily practical needs of men who spent hours at a time in full protection. The integration of armor with civilian clothing also became more sophisticated over time. Earlier armor was essentially military equipment that was worn over normal clothes. But by the 15th century, armorers were working closely with tailors to create integrated systems where every layer was designed to work with every other layer. The padded undergarments worn beneath plate armor became marvels of practical design, cut and sewn to complement the armor pieces they would support. They provided cushioning exactly where it was needed, while remaining thin and flexible in areas where bulk would interfere with armor fit. They incorporated the access features we've discussed, but in ways that were integrated with the overall design rather than simply added as afterthoughts. The development of armor for all occasions also reflects the growing sophistication of medieval metal. Knights didn't need the same level of protection for a tournament as they did for a battlefield, and they certainly didn't need battlefield-grade armor for ceremonial occasions. Armorers began producing specialized suits designed for specific purposes. Tournament armor prioritized protection against blunt trauma over penetration resistance, and it often incorporated additional safety features like reinforced helmets and extra padding. But it also included convenience features that battlefield armor might lack: easier access for repairs between events, more comfortable seating for mounted combat, and better ventilation for events that might last all day. Parade armor represented the ultimate expression of the armorer's art, combining maximum visual impact with surprising practicality. These elaborate suits, often decorated with engraving, gilding, and even precious stones, still had to function as wearable protection. A knight in parade armor might need to wear it for hours during ceremonies, and the armor had to keep him comfortable while making him look magnificent. The emergence of specialized armor for different parts of the day also reflects growing attention to practical concerns. Some knights commissioned separate suits for morning duties, afternoon activities, and evening events, each optimized for its specific requirements. Morning armor might prioritize ease of donning and removal. Afternoon armor might emphasize mobility and comfort, and evening armor might focus on appearance and ceremonial function. The development of armor, storage, and maintenance systems reveals another aspect of the growing sophistication of medieval metalworking culture. As armor became more complex and valuable, the systems for caring for it became equally elaborate. Specialized armor stands were developed that supported the weight of a full suit while allowing air circulation to prevent rust and corrosion. Armor maintenance became a skilled profession in its own right, with specialists who understood not just how to clean and repair metal components, but how to maintain the complex leather hinges, fabric linings, and integrated padding that made armor truly functional. These specialists also understood the practical requirements of the men who wore the armor, and they often suggested modifications and improvements based on user feedback. The documentation of armor fitting modification procedures from the later medieval period reveals an almost modern understanding of ergonomics and user-centered design. Master armorers kept detailed records of their clients' measurements, movement requirements, and specific needs. They developed systematic approaches to fitting that ensured both protection and comfort. Some of the most innovative developments in armor design came from addressing the specific complaints and suggestions of experienced knights. A knight who complained about chafing at a particular point might find that his next suit incorporated additional padding or modified shaping in that area. A knight who needed quicker access to specific parts of his body might receive armor with modified fastening systems or access panels. The evolution of battlefield medicine also influenced armor design. As medieval surgeons became more skilled at treating combat wounds, they began to provide feedback to armorers about how armor design could facilitate medical treatment. This led to innovations like removable sections that could expose wounds for treatment without requiring complete disarmament of an injured knight. The integration of armor with other military technologies also drove innovation. As gunpowder weapons became more common, armor had to evolve to provide protection against new threats while maintaining the practical advantages that had made it valuable against traditional weapons. This challenge pushed armorers to develop new materials, new construction techniques, and new approaches to weight distribution and mobility. The social aspects of armor ownership also influenced design evolution. As armor became more expensive and elaborate, it became as much a symbol of social status as a tool of war. This led to innovations in appearance and decoration, but also to improved durability and repairability. A suit of armor might serve multiple generations of a family, and it needed to be designed for long-term use and periodic updating. The training of new armorers became increasingly sophisticated as the craft evolved. Master armorers developed systematic apprenticeship programs that taught not just metalworking techniques, but also anatomy, physiology, and the practical requirements of armored combat. Young armorers learned to think like the knights who would wear their products, understanding their daily routines, their physical challenges, and their practical needs. By the end of the medieval period, the best armor represented a synthesis of metallurgy, engineering, ergonomics, and practical psychology that wouldn't be out of place in a modern design studio. Every curve served a purpose. Every fastening was positioned for optimal accessibility, and every component was designed to work seamlessly with every other component. As we reach the end of our gentle journey through the centuries of armor evolution, let your mind rest in the knowledge that human creativity and persistence can solve even the most complex practical problems. The knights who first struggled with heavy mail shirts eventually inspired the creation of protection that was both effective and comfortable, proving that patient observation, careful analysis, and continuous improvement can transform even the most challenging circumstances into manageable solutions. And so, dear friend, as our exploration of knightly necessities comes to its peaceful close, may you carry with you into sleep the comforting knowledge that throughout history, human beings have faced practical challenges with ingenuity, dignity, and mutual care. The knights who struggled with the most basic needs while encased in metal armor found solutions that honored both their humanity and their duty, creating traditions of practical wisdom that echo through the centuries. May these gentle stories of medieval innovation and human adaptability guide you into the most restful of dreams, where perhaps you'll find yourself walking through those ancient castle corridors, feeling the cool stone beneath your feet, and knowing that even in the most challenging times, people have found ways to live with comfort, dignity, and grace. If you've drifted peacefully through this journey with me, and if these whispered tales of armor and necessity have helped carry you toward sleep, I'd love to hear about your dreams in the comments below. Until we meet again in another gentle exploration of history's quieter mysteries, sweet dreams, and may your rest be as peaceful as a knight finally free of his armor at the end of a long day. Sleep well, dear listeners, sleep well.